Hello there. If you're wondering, 2 in 1 day, you have it right. I am videotaping. This is my second video for today because I have something so wonderful to share. It's a family affair. If you want to get your kids out here to watch this or hand this video to them when you finished watching this, I think you're going to want to do that. Okay, let me get myself settled. First of all, today is November 11th, and I was remiss in this morning's video that I didn't mention that, and frankly, I kind of forgot until after I uploaded or created the video. Then I was watching the news, and it was November 11th, Veterans Day, all over the place. And I have some of the best things that I want to share with you guys, and to give it a little context, you need to know that my mother was raised by obviously by her mother in Missouri. And my grandmother we approximate 15 years old when she birthed my mother. So she was a very young mother from a family of 6 siblings, and they lived in a rural area. They had their own garden. They fed themselves. They just, they were one of many families that lived that way. My mother is 92, so this was when she was, born practically. My grandmother, my mother's mother, ended up basically giving my mother or handing my mother off to her mother, my mother's grandmother. And her name was Grandma Annie. So Grandma Annie ended up raising my mother. Now, the good news is that my mother had lots of aunties that were kind of like not much older than she was because of her mother having my mom at such a young age. Okay, all this will play into the story I'm going to tell you in a little while. It'll make more sense. All right, so the story that I want to tell is the story of a veteran from World War II named Johnny. Johnny was my grandfather. Johnny was not my biological grandfather, but he was the only grandfather that I knew. And Johnny married my mother's mother. And Johnny was about 13, or I think he was 13 years younger than my grandmother. So and you need to know that so it makes sense to you. This story makes sense. Johnny, this is a story about Johnny. Johnny was born in Nebraska. He was a Nebraska boy. And he was one of 3 children, the only son. His parents were crazy about him because he was the only son. And he had 2 wonderful sisters, one of which is still alive, Maxine. Hi, shout out to Maxine. So Johnny was big and buff and corn-fed. And so he was like the hometown football player hero, the hometown star, the hometown this, the hometown that. And I actually have an original newspaper from Lincoln, Missouri that talks about the football games, because he was a football star, and it talks about all the football games. And the date on this newspaper is November 21st, 1935. I don't know if you can see that, but there it is. So my grandfather's older sister moved to Los Angeles when she became an adult, wanted to, get out of Nebraska. And so I'm not sure if she had a fiance or was married or whatever, but she moved to Los Angeles. And after my grandfather was sort of like out of college and wanted to find bigger and better vistas, he said, I want to come out to California with you. And so she said, come on out. You can stay with us until you get a place of your own, a job and whatever. So he did. And he got a job working at a parking lot, parking cars in a parking lot. Now he's probably like 18 and a half. And the parking lot was right across the street from Los Angeles City Hall. So there was a gentleman that owned the parking lot that employed my grandfather. Well, when World War II broke out, my grandfather enlisted and went off to war. But the man that owned the parking lot said, Johnny, if you come back from the war, you can be my partner in this parking lot. You will have a job. In fact, you'll have more than a job. You'll be my partner. So my grandfather knew that he had a job when he returned from the war. So he was one of the first troops taken from our country, and he fought in North Africa. If you know anything about World War II, North Africa, our tank division, the Germans' Panzer division, Panzer means tank for the Germans, they fought together in North Africa, and we were newbies. We were beginners in the war, and we did not fight well. So my grandfather, as a result, was taken prisoner of war by Rommel. And he was taken prisoner of war and was put in a stalag for the remainder of the war, which was like 4 years he was a prisoner of war. Now, I want to read, well, first of all, here's a picture of my grandfather. This picture would have been taken before he went off to war, but after he got his uniform and reported to his mom and dad to share how spiffy he looked in his uniform. Isn't that adorable? Look how young he was. So, okay. So then he goes off to war and he becomes prisoner of war. And on the street that he lived on in Missouri, his mother had a sister that lived down the same street, down the block. And her son also enlisted in World War II at the same time that Grandpa Johnny did. And he was trained as a pilot. Now that's important for the story. So when my Grandpa Johnny became a prisoner of war, this was the first letter that he wrote home. I have all of his letters that he wrote for 4 years as a prisoner of war. Look at these. I'm not going to read them. I'm not going to read them all, but I am going to read this first letter because it's quite telling. Remember, he's like 18 and a half, 19 years old, never really been out of Nebraska, barely went to Los Angeles. Now he's in North Africa, taken prisoner by Rommel. He is in, this letter is from Stalag 7A. That's one of the camps he was in. He was eventually transferred to another one because I've done research. Okay, you can hardly read the writing on this. It's only like 5 sentences long. It says, I was captured February 15th, as you probably have received word by now. I am a prisoner of war in Germany. I know there will be no use telling you not to worry, as you will, but there is no need, as I am safe and feel good. Have enough to eat and a good barracks to sleep in. There are a few things I wish you would send. You will have to see the Red Cross and find out about it and the size of the box to send it in. I need 2 towels, 2 suits of underwear, summer, size 36, 3 pair of wool socks, fairly heavy, your 1 pair of wool gloves, That is all the clothes I need as we get the rest here. Send me razors, 25 blades, toothbrush, powder, tweezers, comb, shaving soap, brush. Send whatever chocolate you can. Find out if you can send cigarettes. If you can, send them as I can trade them off. Write and tell Ethel and Maxine, his sisters. Write and tell Ethel and Maxine that I am all right, and all my friends will write as I will write as often as I can. As ever, Johnny. So imagine being his mother, the mother of probably a 19-year-old taken prisoner of war, and that is your first thinking. He was, probably, who knows what. Well, I have talked to his sister, and she has told me the story about they hadn't heard from him, and they wondered if he had been KIA, MIA, and so when they received this letter, they were thrilled to know he was still alive and that he was a prisoner of war and at least still alive. So here are pictures. Now, when you see these pictures, if you're part of the mature community, you so relate to the pictures you have of your father and perhaps your grandfather. Now, actually, he could be my father, but he is, because he was so much younger than my grandmother, who was so young when she had my mother. So here's a picture this is his high school graduation picture. He was a football star, and this is the number that was sewn on his football jacket, class of 35. This is a cute picture now when the war was over, all the GIs returned, and my father and his friends and the uncles, my mother's aunties, got married, and their husbands, anyway, they all moved to California. They had been stationed from the Midwest to like Long Beach, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego. So they had a taste of what California was like. And many of them ended up moving here, including my family. That's how we got to California. So look how cute this is. Now this is my grandfather, so dapper. This is my dad. And this is Uncle Bob. So these guys, he was the oldest, probably like 6 years older than my dad and older than Uncle Bob. So they have since, of course, passed. But look at their style. I just love those slacks. Aren't they just so handsome and young? They all ended up making a good living for themselves, had wonderful families, loving families. And, it just turned out to be, part of America. And so being that it's Veterans Day, I did want to share this great information from my grandfather who survived being a prisoner of war. And I will tell you one more thing, because I think this is so interesting. I remember asking, when I was a little girl and my grandfather was still alive, there was one really crazy thing that he did that freaked me out, freaked all of us kids out. And so we would say to my mom and we would say to my grandma, his wife, why does Grandpa Johnny do that? And so she would say, honey, it's because he was a prisoner of war and he guards his food. So I remember what that relates to. When my grandma would serve him his dinner, they did not have children, so he would come home from working and she would put his dinner on the table. And we lived in a duplex. My grandmother and grandfather lived in the front. My mom and dad lived in the back with me and with my sister and I. Eventually, my mom and dad had more children and we had to move away into a bigger house. But at this time, housing was scarce after World War II everywhere, and also in Los Angeles area. My father ended up going into aerospace and worked at the LA airport. And my grandfather became a a construction worker with a big housing builder in the LA area. In fact, he built the home that he lived in and we lived in. Okay, so so because we were connected, it was like a condo, but then we called them duplexes. Big yards, the whole big neighborhood, the whole thing. But because we were so close to each other, oftentimes, we'd go to my grandma's house just a few steps away, knock on her door, and we'd go in and she would say, oh, come on in, kids, whatever, what can I get you? She would give us coffee and she'd put heavy cream and sugar in it, stir it up in a pretty coffee cup, and we got to drink that. And it was, I thought I was, so glamorous. Well, I didn't know glamorous from schlamorous. Well, anyway, so my grandpa, when he would be served his dinner, he would put his arms around his plate like this. He'd look all around. And he would like slurp it. He'd like, he'd keep looking around like this. So I was like, we had been taught to have table manners. We didn't eat like that. So I was all, like, Mom, why does Grandpa eat like that? And she said, that's when she said, honey, it's because he was a prisoner of war, and food was his ticket to survival. And that is what he carries in his mind today. So when he is served his meal, he guards it because that is his lifeblood. And you just have to respect that and don't argue, don't say anything to him about that. That's just the way it is. But I did, of course. I was a little girl and I was like, Grandpa, why do you eat like that? And he said, because I was a prisoner, and he was so loving and so wonderful. But when it came to food, oh no. And he would, in a gruff voice, he was very masculine, very big muscles, lots of hair greased back, and he wore his nail bags. And he was suntan from working out in the sun all day long, and he wore those t-shirts that were like underwear t-shirts, those white t-shirts that showed off his big white teeth and his dark skin and his black hair. And he would say, I was kind of scared of him, and he had these big work boots clumped up on the steps, and I was like a little girl in there drinking my coffee, that my grandma had given me. So he would say, because I was a prisoner of war, and I had to eat bugs to survive. And I was like, ooh, Grandpa ate bugs. But he was like, and you'd be lucky to get a bug. Like, oh my gosh. So, when they talk about World War II, and they talk about PTSD, which comes with certainly any form of service to our country, and we all know there are many other forms of PTSD from all kinds of tragedies in life. But this particular PTSD was from my grandfather, who was a prisoner of war in Germany, taken by Rommel, and it had to do with his food and how he approached food. So now that I'm an adult, of course I understand. But when I was a little girl, I was like, what the what? I didn't get it. It's freaky to me. So there's a lot more to this story. If you're interested, I'll share it with you. Really some fun, cute coincidences that you just go, oh my gosh, how wonderful is that? But the video's gone on quite long. So anyway, you guys, this is hail to my grandfather. Hail to all the men and women in our armed services who fought for us. And a double hail for all those who fought and died for us, died for our freedom, died for us to be able to live the lives we live today. How can you ever say thank you enough? Not just to them, but to their families, to their parents who gave them to our country and had those gold stars on their windows at home. I marvel at what our country did to win that war. I marvel at what our country does to win any war and to combat any enemy that comes against the USA. Okay, you guys, God bless America, and God bless you. P.S. I love you, and thanks for tuning in today, my second video of the day. Bye-bye.